Well, you already touched on the show a little bit, but I didn't want to miss talking about SpongeBob because, as you said, it's this big, over the top, vibrant, full of energy type of world. And I think that there is something that, directors would be really interested in, kind of once again going back to the Burton thing, but like ingesting that world, taking in all of the influences, but then your process of really making it so specific to what the show needed to be. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think it was in many ways similar, but an even more extreme case than Beetlejuice, because there was no way we were making the cartoon, right? Like,
Right.
we live in a three-dimensional world that we have to encounter, and so that in it was both harder, but in some ways easier. It's like doing what the cartoon does is impossible, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
cannot be done. And so we really had have to have our own ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make it our own. And so that very much was about absorbing a more fundamental idea of the DNA of what that idea is, what the the sort of spirit um and like the style of comedy and the irreverence of
Right.
SpongeBob was. And then like how do we do that ourselves and do that for ourselves? Um, so it's like what in the animation is about, you know, animation in our world became about puppets and about
Mm-hmm.
um that the mountain becomes a pile of boxes. And how do you translate all these ideas into um, sort of other mediums and other styles, um, but uh, the maintaining that sort of core feeling, right? And a
Sure.
lot of that, David Zinn, who designed the set, really sort of, and obviously the director sort of set a path. It's like when they're like, oh, the
Mm-hmm.
show curtain, it's going to be made out of, you know, yellow scrub sponges.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, it was a giant wall made of yellow sponges, right? And in the shape of this to look like a pineapple skin. I mean, like it doesn't make any sense, but it's full of these sort of winks and nods and sort of playful ways of approaching things. And it's also full of like, well, these are the tools we have.
Right.
These like, how do you make the best version of something with what you've got,
Right.
right? Like we cannot do the animation. Don't even try. Don't
Sure.
even try to sort of tell a joke or make things in the style. I mean, I think the rubber costume is the perfect example, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of theme park shows where, there in fact is a theme park show for SpongeBob where it's like a guy in a latex suit that makes him look like the shape of SpongeBob. It's like everyone knows he's not a cartoon character, right? So it's like you're not actually fooling anybody. And so it's like making the best thing with the tools that that you have, you
Right.
know, is I think like the core, um, like that's the sort of key to what we did. It's like, well, these are the tools we have. We have the tools of the theater, right? And we can make sculptures out of pool noodles, and we can make these sort of crazy fanciful things in a completely different language. They look totally different, and yet they sort of come from that spirit.
Right.
Um, and I think that's a lot about, theater making. It's like, well, you know, we have what we have. It's in the room. Like we have the limitations of time and space, and all we can bring to it is like ingenuity and invention because the stage isn't going to get any bigger,
Right.
and the time you have to for technical rehearsals may not get any longer. And so it's like the only like thing that is really ours to bring is invention.
Sure.
And I think that like having um that willingness to sort of dream and it's about faith in an audience. I mean, that's what the
Mm,
core thing about SpongeBob was about having faith in our audience that they would come with us.
right.
And I remember like the best I was with Tina one day at a preview and we were sort of standing at the back of the auditorium after like the 10th preview or something like that. And you know, it's often exciting to stand there just because you just hear these little snippets of conversations of who on any show, hearing people walk past you and like eavesdropping a little bit, standing in the lobby or in the aisles and just hearing the conversations people leave. And this kid walks by and says, um, it says something like, you know, it was just, oh, now I finally saw the real SpongeBob, right? And in that kid's mind,
Yeah, yeah,
that was the real SpongeBob, and the cartoon was the cartoon version. And it's like he
wow.
had it totally backwards. But the point is like more than the kid, and of course I was like, great. We were
Yeah,
very happy
right,
with
right,
ourselves
right.
that day. That was a cause for celebration. But more to the point is like an audience of any age will go with you, right?
Sure.
And go with you aesthetically. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I love about the theater, and it as sort of I'm always sad about in film
Mm,
is I get to make things that look crazy. I mean, you
yeah.
look at Dear Evan Hansen on stage and you look at the film,
Hmm.
right? And the film was not a great success, but
Sure.
also just visually, the same audiences were they were the same audience that saw the movie and saw this
Right,
the show. And the audience of the show was willing to accept like what is an incredible degree of abstraction, right?
right,
Like and freedom and like sort of uh, uh, a sort of exciting set of ideas, and then they make the film, and they weren't wrong. They needed to shoot it in a high school with like real lockers and real kids and real phones and all those things.
right.
And I think that one of the things that I think you can bring to theater at any level is that willingness. Like an audience is there to see something, and are and if you do your job well and sort of also really importantly, really just fully commit to an idea, it's amazing what an audience will do for you, right?
Right.
They'll be like, yeah, that guy in the yellow shirt, he's SpongeBob. Done.
Yeah.
Let's
Hmm.
go. Let's have a
Hmm.
good time, you
Right.
know? And I think that can be true about all sorts of things about what you expect people to do visually. I think that if you looked at my designs, didn't know what they were of, in many cases, they um I think that people would in the abstract think of them as like incredibly visually demanding. They you know, and um I think that actually an audience is ready to go with you if you treat them well, right? And some
Right.
of that's about coming up, you know, treating them well. What does that mean? I think it means it's being consistent, right? Like this is a huge tangent, but one of the big things that I think is a big part of my work is also I think I'm going to set up a set of rules.
Hmm.
And then for myself, for the design, how is this visual world going to work?
Right.
And then I'm going to be consistent,
Right.
right? I can't halfway through Evan Hansen start making something that doesn't look like Evan Hansen. I've
Sure.
set up an expectation and I need to live in that visual world. And that sort of coherency is the sort of thing that lets an audience um, feel comfortable. And then they're like, oh, these are the rules of this world. And I know how to look at this. I know how to
Hmm.
look at this world. I know how to live in it. And and that's, I think, it's a big part to then having freedom, right? Like I get to make the rules, and as long as I follow the rules I made up, I can do anything, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's also a big challenge about projection, though. And they're like, again, it's like why projection is, frankly, I think so hard is that so much of it as a medium is a medium that's built from like collage, and there's so many different
Hmm.
possible inputs, right? You know, like you're doing painted scenery, maybe there's only one painter.
Sure.
Everything's going to be sort of stylistically uniform because there's one person's hand with a brush in it.
Right.
When you're making something out of found images and collage and all these things, like, well, I could look like anything. And it's a
Right.
huge
Right.
challenge to like, no, bring it all into the same hand and bring it all feel like, oh, this is a world.
Hmm.
It's like on stage, it all feels like one thing, even if like that's a piece of stock from Getty and this is a photograph I took myself and that's, you know, this other piece of content. How do you get all those things to kind of glue together into a consistent language?
Right.
And that's
Right.
about following rules and being like, what are the rules? You know?
Yeah.
And like I said, they can be anything as long as you sort of create a, a view. This is my view of this piece. And that could be as simple as like, I mean, Tommy, which I just finished, um, like the rule was that there was going to be a stripe across the bottom of the stage for the whole show.
Mhm.
Like the bottom 8 feet going to be bright, the
Yeah.
top 12 feet going to be dark. That was true from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I can do anything. But like people like, oh, I understand the rules now. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
very simple rule, but it also forces me to be stylistically consistent. Like those rules are helpful. They keep
Yeah.
me honest and, you know, and contained in a way.